Hi folks, this is Mark Dashnow from Kirkville Locomotive Works doing a quick update on the MLW RS-10. MLW is Montreal Locomotive Works. It is a subsidiary of Alco that made the Canadian versions of some of the Alco products. Today I'm working on the RS-10. I have both a high hood and a chop nose version that I'm working on. And I just wanted to update the progress. The main bodies are basically done. I'm working now on fuel tanks, which we can see here. And next I'll be printing up the frames, and then I'll be assembling and doing final prep on these. I've started some of the finishing sanding on these two parts. You can see this right here is fresh off the printer. Which has, because of the way this is printed on the printer, has what are called stitch lines, not to be confused with print lines or gaps in prints. I'll go over why it does that in a second. But this right here is filled with putty. And then sanded, and realistically this took about 3 minutes. There's a couple reasons why this happens. 3D printers do not like arches. It's basically, I'm going to try to explain this with pencils. If we can see, filament is round when it comes out of off the spool, and it's round when it comes out of the print nozzle, and it squishes just a little bit, but it's still basically a round shape, and it stacks one layer on top of another. If we can picture this vertically, your pencils are the way to do that, but if we can picture that. But what happens is, in between each one of those prints, there's a gap between each one, because it can't flatten down to a perfect flat face. That's called a print line, and this line is prevalent on the horizontal angles. So this piece right here, its print lines go horizontally. And this piece right here can print without any stitching like this piece right here does. And this right here is relatively easy to finish. Basically, a couple coats of paint directly over the surface starts to get rid of the print lines. Print lines are really easy to get rid of. Stitch lines, on the other hand, are a completely different animal to deal with. Some parts, like this one right here, I would love to print it this way so that I get all of my lines horizontal, so that they're only print lines. But unfortunately, this one's a little high for the printer, and I want to keep basically this length because it's prototypical of where the joints are on the engine, and I would rather print it to that length versus cutting it in half and then dealing with a joint somewhere that I really don't want to. But what that does is that ends up with a stitch line on the curve or the arch of the print. Basically how I deal with that is using that putty. I haven't sanded this part yet, but this is basically that same piece, except this one already has some filler added. Now I just gotta sand that down. And then on this piece here, this printed like this, so the print lines are this way, and print lines are easy to get rid of, but the stitch lines right here are what needs to be filled and sanded. So you can see this is basically the same piece, filled in with that same putty. And now I just got to do a final sanding on it. Realistically, this took me, if I'm lucky, 6 minutes to sand it, put the putty in, let it dry, and then give it another touch-up sanding. Filled any areas that needed touch-up, and now I'm ready to give this a final sanding, and then this piece is done. That is the body. This piece here prints this way, so it's only print lines, which are easy. For the cabs have, stitch lines at the cab, but we're not really concerned about those. I'll knock them back a little bit like I did on this, but the only reason that's for is better surface area for when I put the caps on these, like this Century. The Century has a cap that overhangs each side, and I can't print those on a 3D printer on this without supports, and I don't really want to use supports. So this cap will eventually go on, or a cap will go on here, and that'll be on the top, and this is actually much smoother than those stitch lines because that prints like that. Couple coats of paint on that, and those print lines start to vanish. On the noses, basically the same deal with this. It had to print like this because of the steps. I couldn't print like that without putting supports, because it would put supports in here, and it would put supports in here, which basically just wastes a lot of filament. So I printed it like this. It drew, and I got to the end, it put some stitch lines in there, and just like the end, I just filled that in, and then sanded it, 6 minutes on that. And then same with the low nose. The number board obviously will, the number board will eventually go on, glued on there, basically there. But this model is coming along. The reason why I try to do the joints where they're kind of supposed to be, so that if you try to do a model like this, where you want to show the hood open and show an engine and do some more of the guts, you can go ahead and do that with my models. And then let's see, what else do we have here? Basically, even the RS-36 uses the same fuel tank, and then basically I have extensions, and the extensions go on the fuel tank to make different style fuel tanks. And then C420 has a rounded fuel tank. Those get basically just a, they're just glued right on there. The pictures I've seen, there are lines going down every couple of feet, so I wanted to kind of replicate some of that. But that's a C420 that I'm working on. And then that is it for the update on the RS-10.